CEO blocked veteran single dad's promotion. His West Point degree made her resign in shame. She crushed his dreams with one cold word: unqualified. But when the truth of his West Point past exploded in that boardroom, the powerful CEO who silenced him was the one forced to walk away in disgrace. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the worn but well-loved wooden table. Jack Reynolds stood at the stove, skillfully flipping pancakes while keeping an eye on the clock mounted on the wall. The familiar scent of coffee and breakfast filled their modest home. "Emily, breakfast is ready," he called out, sliding 2 perfectly golden pancakes onto a plate. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Emily appeared in the doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her dark hair was hastily pulled into a ponytail, and she stifled a yawn as she dropped into her usual chair. "Dad, you didn't have to make pancakes on a weekday," she said, though her eyes lit up at the sight of the steaming plate in front of her. Jack smiled, pouring a glass of orange juice for her. "Well, today's a special day. Might as well start it right." Emily studied her father's face as she drowned her pancakes in maple syrup. "The promotion announcement is today, isn't it?" "That obvious, huh?" Jack chuckled, sitting down with his own plate and coffee cup. "You've been checking your phone every 5 minutes," Emily pointed out between bites. "And you're wearing your lucky tie." Jack glanced down at his navy blue tie, the one his late wife had given him years ago. He hadn't realized Emily had noticed that detail. "Your mom always said it brought out my eyes." She was right. Emily's voice softened. "You're gonna get it, Dad. You deserve it." Jack took a sip of his coffee, trying to hide the worry that crept into his expression. The bills scattered on the counter behind them seemed to loom larger in his mind. "Let's not count our chickens before they hatch, kiddo." "But everyone at the company respects you. Sarah, from my math class, her mom works in accounting, and she says you're the best manager they've ever had." "That's kind of them to say." Jack checked his watch. "Speaking of math class, we better get moving. Don't want you to be late." Emily wolfed down her last bite and grabbed her backpack. "Promise you'll call me as soon as you hear about the promotion?" Jack stood, straightening his tie. "Promise, though it might not be until this afternoon's company meeting." "I'm proud of you, Dad." Emily hugged him tight, and for a moment, Jack was struck by how grown up she seemed. Mom would be too. The drive to Emily's school was filled with their usual morning banter, but Jack's mind kept drifting to the meeting ahead. After dropping Emily off, he navigated through morning traffic to the office building, its glass windows gleaming in the morning sunday. The office was already buzzing with activity when Jack arrived. He noticed the usual morning greetings seemed more enthusiastic than normal, with knowing smiles from his coworkers. Many of them had worked alongside him for years, watching him put in countless extra hours and lead his team through difficult projects. "Morning, Jack," called Tom from accounting, giving him a thumbs up as he passed. "Big day, Mr. Reynolds," whispered Sarah, one of the newer employees he'd mentored. Jack smiled and nodded, trying to maintain his professional composure despite the butterfly feeling in his stomach. He settled into his office, reviewing reports and responding to emails, all while the clock seemed to tick by exceptionally slowly. Finally, at 2 p.m., people began filing into the large conference room. Jack straightened his lucky tie one last time before taking his seat. The room was packed, with some employees standing along the walls. The air felt charged with anticipation. Victoria Steele strode in exactly on time, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her steel gray suit matched her cold demeanor as she took her position at the front of the room. Jack had only interacted with her a few times since she'd become CEO 6 months ago, but something about her always made him uneasy. "Good afternoon," Victoria began, her voice crisp and professional. "As you know, we're here to announce several key promotions that will help shape the future of this company." She opened a leather folder and began reading names. With each announcement, polite applause followed. Jack sat straight in his chair, his military training keeping his expression neutral despite his mounting tension. For the position of Western Regional Manager Thomas Chen, applause. For Director of Operations, Sarah Martinez, more applause. And finally, for Vice President of Corporate Development, Michael Anderson. The room grew quiet. Jack felt his heart sink as Victoria closed her folder with a sharp snap. Several employees turned to look at him, confusion and concern evident on their faces. The position of VP of Corporate Development, the role Jack had been practically running for months, had just been given to someone with half his experience. "Thank you all for attending," Victoria concluded, her tone dismissive. Please congratulate your colleagues on their new positions. Jack sat frozen in his chair as people began to file out, many shooting him sympathetic glances. He could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken question hanging in the air. How could they pass over Jack Reynolds? The lucky tie suddenly felt too tight around his neck. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Emily, eager to hear the news. But for the first time in years, Jack didn't know what to tell his daughter. Victoria was already heading for the door, not sparing him a single glance. The message was clear. In her eyes, he wasn't even worth acknowledging. Jack remained seated, his military training the only thing keeping his composure intact as the room slowly emptied, leaving him alone with the echo of opportunity slipping away. The afternoon sun streaming through the conference room windows felt colder now, and the weight of the bills at home, Emily's future college expenses, and all his carefully laid plans seemed to press down on his shoulders. But he straightened his back, just as he had done countless times during his military service. This wasn't the first battle he'd faced, and like those before, he would face it with dignity. The office buzzed with hushed conversations as employees dispersed from the meeting room. Jack sat motionless at his desk, staring at the family photo of him and Emily at her middle school graduation. His fingers traced the silver frame, mind replaying Victoria's words from the meeting over and over. The promotion he'd worked so hard for had slipped through his fingers like smoke. A gentle tap on his shoulder broke through his thoughts. Miguel Hernandez, his closest friend at work, stood there with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Hey, amigo, thought you could use this. Miguel placed 1 cup on Jack's desk, careful to avoid the neat stack of reports. That meeting was rough. Jack managed a weak smile. Thanks, Miguel. He wrapped his hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to. I just don't understand. My numbers are solid. My team's performance is up 30% since last quarter. Miguel pulled up a chair, his usually cheerful face creased with concern. Look, we all know you deserve that promotion. Thompson in accounting? The guy can barely manage his email inbox, let alone a department. Maybe I missed something, Jack said quietly, his military-trained posture slumping slightly. Did I not prepare enough for the quarterly review? Or was it the Davidson Project timeline? Stop that right now, Miguel said firmly, leaning forward. You're the most prepared person in this building. Remember last month when the shipping system crashed? Everyone was running around like chickens without heads. But you had a backup plan ready to go. Saved the whole department millions. Jack nodded absently, remembering how his military training had kicked in during that crisis. Assess, adapt, overcome. The same principles that had served him well as an officer now helped him excel in logistics. And don't forget, Miguel continued, you did all that while helping me plan my daughter's quinceañera. My wife still talks about how you found that perfect venue when everything else was booked. That brought a genuine smile to Jack's face. Sophia's face, when she saw those decorations, made it all worth it. Exactly. That's what I mean. You're not just good at the job, Jack. You care about people. That's real leadership. Before Jack could respond, Sarah from HR hurried past their desks, looking worried. Jack? Miss Steele wants to see you in her office. Right away. The smile faded from Jack's face. Miguel gave his shoulder a supportive squeeze. Hey, maybe she's reconsidered. Maybe, Jack said, though his gut told him otherwise. He straightened his tie and stood up, automatically falling into the confident stance that had carried him through countless military briefings. Victoria's office occupied the corner of the building, all glass and chrome. Jack knocked on the door frame, noting how she didn't immediately look up from her laptop. Come in, Reynolds. Close the door. Jack did as instructed, standing at ease before her desk. Victoria finally looked up, her expression cool and evaluating. I assume you're wondering about the promotion decisions announced today, she said, folding her hands on her desk. Yes, ma'am. I'd appreciate understanding where I fell short, so I can improve. Victoria's lip curled slightly at his formal address. That's exactly the problem, Reynolds. Ma'am. Sir, all these military mannerisms. This isn't West Point, and it certainly isn't the Army. Jack felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice steady. With respect, my military background has helped me develop strong leadership skills and... Leadership? Victoria cut him off with a sharp laugh. Let me be direct. Your military background doesn't translate to leadership in the modern corporate world. We need innovative thinking, flexibility, not rigid command structures and blind obedience. Each word hit like a physical blow, but Jack maintained his composure. Years of military discipline kept his face neutral, even as his hands clenched at his sides. The Army taught me about adaptability, creative problem solving, and most importantly, taking care of my people, he said quietly. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. You can save the recruitment speech. My decision is final. You're dismissed. Jack turned and walked out of her office, his steps measured and controlled, despite the humiliation burning in his chest. Through the glass walls, he could see Miguel watching worriedly from his desk, but Jack couldn't bring himself to meet his friend's eyes. Not yet. Not while the sting of Victoria's words was still so fresh. His military background didn't translate. Those years of service, the lessons learned in leadership, the lives he'd been responsible for, all dismissed as worthless in the modern corporate world. Jack's throat felt tight as he thought of Emily, of the promises he'd made to give her a better life. How could he tell his daughter that the very values he'd taught her to believe in, discipline, honor, service, were now being held against him? He paused at his desk, gathering his composure. Through the window, he could see the American flag flying in front of the building, and for a moment he was transported back to countless mornings watching that same flag rise over bases across the world. The memory steadied him, even as Victoria's words echoed in his mind. Miguel appeared at his side, concern written across his features. You okay, brother? Jack couldn't answer immediately. The weight of the day, the lost promotion, Victoria's cutting remarks, the uncertainty of his future, pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. But he'd carried heavier weights before. He'd survived worse days than this. I will be, he finally said, his voice low but determined. The words felt hollow in his mouth, but they were all he had to offer right now. The humiliation was still too fresh, the wound too raw for anything more. The evening sun cast long shadows through the Reynolds kitchen window as Jack stirred a pot of spaghetti sauce. The familiar routine of cooking dinner usually brought him comfort, but tonight his movements were mechanical, his mind still stuck in Victoria's conference room. Emily sat at the kitchen counter, textbooks spread out in front of her, occasionally glancing up at her father. She noticed how his shoulders slumped, how he hadn't hummed along to the radio like he usually did while cooking. The silence between them felt heavy, unusual for their normally warm dinner preparations. Dad. Emily closed her math book. Is everything okay? Jack turned from the stove, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Of course, sweetheart. How's that geometry homework coming along? Dad. Emily's voice carried that particular tone she'd inherited from her mother, gentle but persistent. You've been stirring that sauce for 10 minutes straight. Something's wrong. Jack's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. He set it down and leaned against the counter, meeting his daughter's concerned gaze. That obvious, huh? Kind of hard to miss when you've barely said 2 words since you got home. Emily pushed her books aside. Did something happen at work? Jack began plating the pasta, buying himself a moment to find the right words. Remember that promotion I mentioned? The regional manager position? Emily nodded, her eyes brightening. Did you get it? Not exactly. Jack set their plates on the table, his movements careful and precise, the way he always was when trying to maintain control. They went with someone else. What? Emily's fork clattered against her plate. But you worked so hard. You're always the last one to leave. And you even worked through that flu last month. Sometimes things just don't work out the way we expect, Jack said softly, twirling spaghetti around his fork without taking a bite. Life's funny that way. Emily watched her father, seeing past his attempted casual tone. It's not fair. You're the best person there. Hey now. Jack reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Things will work out, Em. They always do. That's what you always say. Emily squeezed back, her young face serious. But who's making sure things work out for you, Dad? Jack's throat tightened at her words, reminded so strongly of her mother in that moment. I've got you, don't I? That's all the good fortune I need. Emily wasn't fooled by his deflection, but she recognized the slight tremor in his voice. She stood up and walked around the table, wrapping her arms around his shoulders in a tight hug. Mom would have told him exactly what she thought about passing you over. Jack chuckled softly, patting her arm. That she would have. Your mother never did mince words. They finished dinner talking about lighter things. Emily's upcoming science project, the neighbor's new puppy, plans for the weekend. But Emily noticed how her father's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, how he pushed his food around more than he ate it. The next morning arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle. Jack arrived at work early, as usual, determined to maintain his routine, despite yesterday's disappointment. He was organizing files at his desk when Miguel arrived, carrying his usual morning coffee and wearing a concerned expression. "Morning, Jack," Miguel said, settling at his neighboring desk. "How you holding up?" "I'm fine," Jack replied automatically, shuffling papers with military precision. Miguel watched his friend, noting the tension in his jaw. His eyes fell on a document Jack had just set aside, a resume that had slipped from a folder. Something caught his attention, and he leaned closer. "Jack," Miguel said slowly, picking up the paper. "Is this yours?" "Oh, yes. Was updating it last night just in case." Jack trailed off, turning back to his work. Miguel's eyes widened as he read. "West Point? You graduated from West Point?" His voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby desks. "And these medals? Distinguished Service Medal? Bronze Star?" Jack reached for the resume, but Miguel stood up, still reading. "Combat deployments, Special Operations Command experience, advanced leadership training." He looked at Jack in disbelief. "Why didn't you ever mention any of this?" By now, several coworkers had drifted closer, curious about Miguel's exclamations. Sarah, from accounting, peered over his shoulder, her eyebrows shooting up. "I don't like to make a big deal about it," Jack said quietly, uncomfortable with the attention. "It's just my past." "Just your past?" Miguel shook his head in amazement. "Jack, you're a decorated officer. You led troops in actual combat. And Victoria had the nerve to say you lack leadership experience?" The small crowd around their desks grew as word spread. Jack could hear the whispers, see the looks of surprise and respect on his colleagues' faces. Some were shaking their heads in disbelief. Others were pointing at the resume Miguel still held, murmuring about the impressive achievements listed there. "My military service was another life," Jack said, finally retrieving his resume from Miguel's hands. "I'm just trying to do my job here, take care of my daughter." But the whispers had already started spreading through the office like wildfire. "Did you know Reynolds went to West Point? I heard he has a Bronze Star. Can you believe Victoria passed him over?" Jack sat at his desk, trying to focus on his work as the murmurs continued around him. He'd never wanted his military service to define him here, had never sought recognition for it. But as he glanced up at his coworkers' faces, he saw something that made him pause, not just surprise, but genuine respect, and something that looked almost like pride. Miguel leaned against Jack's desk, his voice low. "You know, sometimes the past isn't just the past, amigo. Sometimes it's the foundation that shows exactly who someone island." The break room hummed with the usual lunch hour activity. Jack sat at his usual corner table, methodically unpacking his brown paper bag while reviewing reports on his tablet. The familiar routine helped steady his mind after the morning's disappointments. "Hey, Jack," Miguel called out, pulling up a chair. "Got a minute?" Jack looked up, noticing several other coworkers hovering nearby with curious expressions. Sarah from accounting clutched her salad container, while Tim from IT balanced his coffee mug carefully. "Of course," Jack said, straightening up. "What's on your mind?" Miguel exchanged glances with the others before speaking. "We, saw your resume earlier. Why didn't you ever tell us you graduated from West Point?" Jack's shoulders tensed slightly. He'd never been comfortable discussing his accomplishments. "It didn't seem relevant to mention it," he said quietly. "Not relevant?" Sarah stepped forward, settling into a nearby chair. "Jack, that's incredible. And those medals listed, what were they for?" More colleagues drifted over, forming a small crowd. Jack's cheeks warmed at the attention, but he saw genuine interest in their faces. "It was just doing my duty," he said, but their eager expressions made him continue. "West Point taught me everything about leadership, about putting others first and leading by example." "What was it like there?" Tim asked, pulling up another chair. Jack paused, memories flooding back. "Challenging, intense, but it shapes you in ways you never expect." He smiled slightly. "The first year, they don't even let you walk normally. You have to sprint from building to building, shoulders back, chin tucked." "Really?" Sarah leaned forward. Why? It builds discipline, teaches you to move with purpose. Jack's voice grew warmer as he spoke. Everything there has meaning, from how you make your bed to how you carry yourself. They're building leaders who understand that every detail matters. And the medals? Miguel prompted gently. Jack's hands folded on the table. There was a situation in Afghanistan. Our supply convoy got ambushed in a mountain pass. He spoke carefully, choosing simple words. 2 of our vehicles were disabled. We had wounded men, and night was falling. The break room had grown completely quiet. Even people at other tables were listening now. What did you do? Someone asked softly. What any officer would do. I organized the able men into teams. We got the wounded to safety, protected our supplies, and held position until reinforcements arrived. Jack shrugged. The medal was just paper. The real reward was bringing everyone home. How long were you out there? Tim asked. 18 hours. Jack's voice remained steady. The longest night of my life. But it taught me something crucial about leadership. It's not about giving orders. It's about being there with your people, sharing their hardships, showing them that you'll never ask them to do something you wouldn't do yourself. Sarah shook her head in amazement. And now you're here, leading our logistics team through supply chain crises. Different battlefield, same principles, Jack said with a slight smile. Take care of your people. Stay calm, under pressure. Find solutions, not excuses. That explains so much, Miguel said. The way you handled that system crash last month. You were so steady, kept everyone focused. We'd all been panicking, but you just broke it down into manageable steps. Others nodded in agreement. Jack felt uncomfortable with the praise, but recognized the genuine respect in their eyes. Military leadership is actually perfect for corporate environments, Sarah observed. Planning, organization, crisis management, team building, it's exactly what we need. The conversation spread through the break room as more people joined in, sharing stories of times Jack's leadership had made a difference. His quiet strength during deadline crunches, his habit of personally checking on team members having rough days, the way he always gave credit to others for successes. Down the hall, Victoria Steele emerged from her office, heels clicking sharply against the floor. She paused as fragments of conversation drifted from the break room. Can't believe he has a West Point degree. Bronze star for valor. Best team leader we've ever had. Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her tablet as she noticed several employees glancing her way, their expressions carefully neutral but eyes questioning. The whispers followed her as she walked past. How could anyone say he's not qualified? Makes no sense to pass him over. Exactly the kind of leader we need. Victoria's jaw clenched as she quickened her pace. She built her authority on making others feel small, maintaining control through intimidation and doubt. But she couldn't intimidate away Jack's record of genuine accomplishment. She couldn't dismiss the loyalty he inspired simply by being himself. Back in the break room, Jack glanced at his watch. I should get back to work, he said, gathering his things. Thanks for letting me share. Thank you for telling us, Sarah said warmly. Others nodded in agreement. As Jack headed back to his desk, the buzz of conversation continued. His story spread through the office like ripples in a pond, desk to desk, floor to floor. Employees spoke in hushed, admiring tones about his service, his humility, his proven leadership. Victoria stood at her office window, watching the activity below. Her reflection showed a tight, controlled expression, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The whispers in the halls had grown louder, more confident. For the first time since taking control of the company, she felt her carefully constructed authority beginning to crack. Her jaw tightened as she observed Jack at his desk, calmly working while colleagues stopped by to chat. There was no smugness in his manner, no attempt to capitalize on his growing support. That only made it worse. His quiet dignity stood in sharp contrast to her own calculating ambition, and she could sense the tide of opinion turning. The mahogany-paneled boardroom felt impossibly large, as Jack took his seat along the wall with other department heads. His leather portfolio lay neatly on his lap, his posture naturally straight, old habits from his military days that he couldn't shake. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished table, where board members arranged their papers and tablets. Victoria Steele stood at the head of the table, her designer suit as sharp as her expression. Thank you all for attending today's quarterly review, she began, her voice carrying that practiced mix of authority and polish. "Before we dive into the numbers, I'd like to address some organizational concerns." Jack felt a slight tension in his shoulders. He'd been invited to observe this meeting, a rare privilege for someone at his level. But something in Victoria's tone made him wary. "As you know, we've been discussing modernization initiatives," Victoria continued, pacing slowly. "Our company needs to evolve with the times. That means embracing flexibility, innovation, and fresh perspectives." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room before landing pointedly on Jack. "We can't afford to be rigid in our thinking." A few board members nodded absently, but others shifted in their seats, picking up on the underlying current in her words. "Take our logistics department, for example," Victoria said, clicking through her presentation. "While the numbers are acceptable, we're seeing resistance to new methodologies. Some of our team members seem stuck in outdated approaches." Jack kept his face carefully neutral, though his hand tightened slightly on his portfolio. He knew these criticisms were aimed at him, at the structured systems he'd implemented based on his military experience. Systems that had actually improved efficiency by 23% over the past quarter. "With all due respect," a clear voice cut through the room, "I'd like to examine those numbers more closely." Jack turned, along with everyone else, toward Colonel Sarah Daniels. She sat with the same commanding presence he remembered from the few times they'd crossed paths at military functions. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her business attire as crisp as any uniform. "The logistics department has shown remarkable improvement," Colonel Daniels continued, tapping her tablet. "Mr. Reynolds' team has consistently exceeded targets while maintaining the lowest error rate in the company's history." Victoria's smile tightened. "Numbers aren't everything, Sarah. Modern leadership requires adaptability. Some backgrounds," she glanced at Jack again, "can be too regimented for today's dynamic business environment." "Some backgrounds?" Colonel Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Are you referring to Mr. Reynolds' military service?" The room grew noticeably quieter. Board members looked between Victoria and Sarah with increasing interest. "I simply mean that military leadership styles can be." Victoria searched for the word inflexible. Colonel Daniels stood slowly, her presence filling the room. "As a fellow board member and a veteran myself, I feel compelled to correct this misconception." Her voice carried the weight of decades of command. "West Point graduates are leaders, Mrs. Steele. They're trained in adaptive problem-solving, crisis management, and most importantly, putting their team's success above personal glory." The silence in the room was absolute. Jack sat very still, touched by the defense but professional enough not to show it. "Mr. Reynolds' record speaks for itself," Colonel Daniels continued. "His department's success isn't despite his military background. It's because of it. West Point taught him discipline, integrity, and how to bring out the best in his people. These aren't outdated values. They're timeless leadership principles." Victoria's face had lost some of its color. She gripped her presentation remote tighter, clearly thrown off balance by this unexpected challenge to her authority. "I propose we look at the actual data," Colonel Daniels said, her tone brooking no argument. "Mr. Reynolds, would you walk us through your department's methodology and results?" Before Jack could respond, Victoria cut in. "This meeting has a full agenda, which includes departmental reviews," Colonel Daniels interrupted smoothly. "I believe the board would benefit from hearing directly from someone with such an impressive track record of success." Several board members nodded in agreement. Victoria stood frozen at the head of the table, her carefully crafted narrative crumbling before her eyes. The power dynamic in the room had shifted palpably. Colonel Daniels sat back down, but her presence remained commanding. "West Point's motto is duty, honor, country. These values don't become outdated, Miss Steele. They become more vital in times of change and challenge." The room remained silent. Board members exchanged glances, some nodding thoughtfully, others studying Victoria with new scrutiny. The CEO's authority, so absolute just moments before, had developed its first visible crack. Victoria cleared her throat, attempting to regain control of the meeting. But her voice had lost its earlier confidence. The subtle tremor in her hands as she changed slides betrayed her rattled composure. The boardroom's atmosphere had transformed, and everyone could feel it. The evening air carried a gentle autumn breeze as Jack and Emily walked along their neighborhood's tree-lined street. Streetlights cast warm pools of light on the sidewalk, and fallen leaves crunched softly beneath their feet. Jack had always cherished these after-dinner walks with his daughter. They were moments when both could let their guards down and just be themselves. Emily's ponytail swung back and forth as she practically bounced beside him. Her eyes sparkled with an excitement he hadn't seen in weeks. "Dad! You should have seen Mrs. Peterson's face when I told her about West Point," she exclaimed, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. "She asked if anyone had parents who were leaders, and I just had to tell her about you." Jack felt his cheeks warm slightly. "You didn't have to do that, sweetheart." "Yes, I did." Emily stopped walking and turned to face him. "You never talk about it. You never brag. But Dad, you're a hero." My friend Katie's jaw dropped when I mentioned your medals. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable with the attention, but touched by his daughter's pride. "Those medals don't make me a hero, Em. Just did what needed doing, that's all." They resumed walking, passing by houses with warm light spilling from windows. Through one, they could see a family gathered around their dinner table, reminding Jack of when Emily's mother was still with them. "Mom would want people to know," Emily said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "She always said you were too humble for your own good." Jack's throat tightened. "Your mother was biased," he managed with a small smile. "She was right, though." Emily linked her arm through his. "You know what else happened today? Jason, you know, the quiet kid who sits behind me in math? He came up to me after class. His older brother's thinking about joining the Army, and he wanted to know if he could ask you some questions about West Point." Jack looked down at his daughter's earnest face. "Of course he can. See? People look up to you, Dad. They should know who you really are." Emily squeezed his arm. "I'm just so proud you're my father." Those simple words hit Jack like a physical force, making his eyes sting. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed to hear them. For so long, he'd focused on being strong for Emily, trying to fill the void her mother's passing had left. Sometimes, he forgot that she was growing into a remarkably perceptive young woman. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. The evening air grew cooler, and Jack noticed Emily pulling her light jacket closer. "Should we head back?" he asked. Emily nodded, but then her expression grew serious. "Dad, promise me something?" "What's that?" "Don't let that mean CEO lady make you doubt yourself. Mom always said you were meant for bigger things." Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket before he could respond. The number wasn't one he recognized, but something made him answer it anyway. Jack Reynolds speaking. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Thomas Blackwood from Meridian Logistics." The voice was warm and professional. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time?" Jack's pulse quickened. Meridian was their biggest competitor. "Not at all, Mr. Blackwood. Please, call me Tom. I'll cut right to the chase. Your reputation precedes you, Jack. We've been hearing impressive things about your leadership at Preston Corp. I'd like to discuss a senior position with us. Executive level, full benefits, significant salary increase." Jack's steps slowed to a stop. Emily looked up at him questioningly. "That's very generous," Jack said carefully. "But I'm currently committed to—" "Your loyalty is admirable," Tom interrupted smoothly. "But from what we've heard, Preston isn't exactly reciprocating that loyalty. We value leadership experience here at Meridian, especially military experience. Think about it. Take a few days. We'd love to have you on our team." After exchanging brief pleasantries and ending the call, Jack stood there for a moment, mind racing. Emily tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, what was that about?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Miguel. "Need to talk as soon as possible. Victoria's up to something. Watch your back, amigo." Emily was still waiting for an answer, her face concerned in the streetlight. "Everything okay?" Jack forced a smile. "Just work stuff, honey." But inside, his thoughts were churning. The Meridian offer was tempting, a chance to be appreciated for his experience rather than penalized for it. His team at Preston had become like family, though. Miguel, Sarah in accounting, even old Bill from maintenance. They'd stood by him through some tough times after losing Emily's mom. But if Victoria was plotting something, he thought of Emily, of college expenses looming in a few years, of the mortgage payments that sometimes kept him up at night. Could he risk everything on loyalty to a company whose CEO seemed determined to push him out? They walked the rest of the way home in silence, Jack's mind toggling between Miguel's warning and Meridian's offer. When they reached their front porch, Emily turned to him again. "Whatever you're worried about, Dad, you'll figure it out. You always do." Jack pulled her into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "When did you get so wise?" "Must be those good West Point genes," she quipped, then grew serious. "Just don't stay at Preston if it makes you unhappy. Mom wouldn't want that." Jack kissed the top of her head, even as his phone buzzed again with another urgent text from Miguel. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. Loyalty to his team versus protection for his family. Staying to fight versus taking the safer path. Either way, he knew tomorrow would bring challenges he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Emily gave him one last squeeze before heading inside. Through the window, Jack watched her settle onto the couch with her homework, so much like her mother in the way she tucked her feet under her. His phone felt heavy in his pocket, Miguel's warning and Meridian's offer pulling him in opposite directions. Jack sat in his modest office, staring at the business card from Robertson Associates that felt heavy in his hands. The embossed letters caught the afternoon light streaming through his window. Miguel leaned against the doorframe, his usually cheerful face creased with concern. "You're crazy, man," Miguel said, shaking his head. "Robertson's offering you everything Victoria won't. Better pay, actual respect, and a corner office with a view that doesn't face the parking lot." Jack placed the card down on his desk and smiled quietly. "It's not about the view, Miguel." "Then what is it about? Pride? Because let me tell you, there's no shame in taking a better offer." Miguel walked into the office and sat down in the chair across from Jack. "It's about doing what's right," Jack said, straightening the stack of papers on his desk with military precision. "Running away isn't the answer. Not when so many people here are counting on me." Miguel leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Jack, you've got Emily to think about. A single dad can't afford to be noble when Victoria's got it out for you." Jack's eyes drifted to the photo of Emily on his desk, taken at her last birthday party. She was beaming at the camera wearing the West Point baseball cap he'd given her. "Emily's exactly why I need to stay and fight. What kind of example would I be setting if I ran at the first sign of trouble? This isn't a battlefield, Jack. It's corporate America. Different rules apply here." "That's where you're wrong," Jack replied, his voice firm but gentle. "The principles I learned at West Point, honor, duty, integrity, they matter everywhere. If we abandon them just because it's convenient, what are we really fighting for?" Miguel slumped back in his chair. "Man, sometimes I forget you're not just another paper pusher. You actually believe in all this stuff, don't you?" "With all my heart." Jack stood up and walked to his window. The parking lot below was filling up with the afternoon shift workers. He recognized most of their faces, knew their names, their stories. These people deserve better than what they're getting. Someone needs to stand up for them. "And that someone has to be you?" Miguel asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Who else will?" Jack turned back to face his friend. "Look at what happened in the board meeting. Colonel Daniel stood up for me because she recognized what was at stake. It's not just about my career anymore." Miguel rubbed his face with both hands. "You're going to give me an ulcer, you know that? Fine. What's your plan?" "Keep doing what I've always done. Work hard. Lead by example. Show everyone that character still counts for something in this world." "Victoria won't make it easy," Miguel warned. "She's already spreading rumors about your military rigidity making you unsuitable for modern business." Jack picked up the Robertson business card and with deliberate movements tore it in half. "Then we'll prove her wrong. Not with rumors or schemes, but with results." "We?" Miguel raised an eyebrow. "Unless you're too scared," Jack said, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Miguel stood up, straightening his tie in mock offense. "Hey, I survived 3 years of your crazy morning workout sessions. I think I can handle whatever Victoria throws at us." "Good man." Jack extended his hand, and Miguel shook it firmly. As Miguel headed for the door, he paused. "You know what's funny? Victoria thinks your military background is your weakness. She doesn't realize it's what makes you stronger than her." After Miguel left, Jack sat back down at his desk. He pulled out his phone and dialed Robertson to Associates. The receptionist connected him to Mr. Robertson himself. "Jack, I was hoping to hear from you. Ready to join a company that actually appreciates talent?" "I appreciate the offer, sir, but I'm going to have to decline," Jack said firmly. There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure about that? Victoria Steele has quite a reputation for destroying careers that get in her way. I'm sure. But thank you for considering me. The offer stands if you change your mind, Robertson said, respect evident in his voice. We could use more people with your principles. After hanging up, Jack opened his drawer and pulled out an old photo. It showed him and his late wife Sarah at his West Point graduation. They were young, hopeful, ready to take on the world together. She would have understood his decision. She always believed in fighting for what was right, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, in the executive suite, Victoria Steele paced her office like a caged tiger. Her assistant, Linda, sat nervously taking notes. "Did you see how they looked at me in that board meeting?" Victoria snapped. "That self-righteous Colonel Daniels, practically canonizing Reynolds right there in front of everyone. It was unfortunate timing," Linda offered carefully. Victoria stopped pacing and planted both hands on her desk, leaning forward. "It was more than unfortunate. It was a direct challenge to my authority. And now I hear Reynolds is turning down offers from other companies?" "Yes, Robertson. Associates reached out to him, but he declined." Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into the polished wood of her desk. "He thinks he's so noble, doesn't he? The decorated veteran, the devoted single father, the man of principle. Well, principles don't run companies. Ambition does. Determination does." "Should I schedule another meeting with him?" Linda asked. Victoria straightened up, smoothing her designer suit. Her voice turned cold and calculating. "No more meetings. If Jack Reynolds wants to play the hero, we'll give him exactly what he wants, and then we'll bury him under his own reputation." Linda's pen hovered over her notepad. "What would you like me to do?" A cruel smile spread across Victoria's face as she looked out over the city skyline. "Start digging. I want everything you can find about his military service. Every mission, every posting, every commendation. There's always something, Linda. Always a crack in the perfect facade. And when we find it, we'll make sure everyone knows exactly who their hero really island." The afternoon sun slanted through the office windows as Jack stood before his team in the conference room. 6 faces looked up at him expectantly, some curious, others anxious. The quarterly logistics report had just landed on their desks, and the numbers weren't good. Supply chain delays were threatening their biggest accounts. "I know what you're thinking," Jack said, his voice calm and steady. "The deadline seems impossible, but I learned something important at West Point. Impossible is just a word we use when we haven't found the solution yet." He moved to the whiteboard and began drawing a simple diagram. "Think of this like a military operation. We've got our objective, our resources, and our timeline. The key is breaking it down into manageable parts." Miguel, sitting near the front, nodded appreciatively. "Like a battle plan?" "Exactly." Jack smiled, drawing more lines connecting different elements. "Each person here has unique strengths. Sarah's great with data analysis. Tom knows our shipping partners better than anyone. Linda can make spreadsheets sing." The team members sat up straighter, their expressions shifting from worry to interest. "I'm not asking for long hours or sacrificed weekends," Jack continued. "I'm asking for smart work, clear communication, and looking out for each other. In the Army, we called it having each other's six." As he outlined the project structure, the door cracked open. Emily peeked in, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. Jack had almost forgotten she was stopping by after school today. "Come on in, sweetheart," he called out. "We're just getting started here." Emily slipped into an empty chair at the back, her eyes wide as she watched her father work. Jack could see her taking everything in, the way the team leaned forward when he spoke, how he remembered everyone's names and roles, the respect in their faces. "Tom, you'll coordinate with our West Coast partners," Jack continued. "Sarah, I need those analytics by Thursday. Miguel, you're our liaison with IT." He assigned roles based on each person's strengths, just as he'd learned to do with his soldiers. "What about the Henderson account?" Linda asked. "They're our biggest concern. That's where we'll start," Jack replied. "Remember, we eat the elephant one bite at a time." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Emily grinned. She'd heard her father use that phrase at home countless times. "I'll be right there with you," Jack assured them. "My door is always open. If you hit a roadblock, come see me. If you need backup, I'm your first call. We succeed or fail as a team." The meeting broke up with a new energy in the room. As people gathered their materials, Jack noticed Emily watching from her corner, beaming with pride. Over the next few days, the office hummed with focused activity. Jack's military precision merged seamlessly with his natural compassion. When Sarah struggled with a particularly complex data set, he sat with her until they solved it together. When Tom's child got sick, Jack rearranged the schedule so he could work from home. Emily started dropping by more often after school, supposedly to do her homework in her father's office. But Jack knew she really came to watch him lead. She'd sit quietly, pretending to study algebra while actually observing how he handled challenges and motivated his team. One afternoon, she overheard him talking to a frustrated colleague in the break room. "I don't think I can do this, Mr. Reynolds," the young man said, his voice strained. "The numbers just aren't adding up." "Take a breath, David," Jack replied calmly. "Remember what I told you about battlefield clarity? When everything seems overwhelming, focus on the next right step. Just the next one. What's that step for you right now?" Emily watched as David's shoulders relaxed. Her father had used the same approach with her when she'd struggled with her science fair project last year. The team's progress became noticeable throughout the office. Other departments started paying attention when Jack's group consistently met their deadlines. Their methods were different, more structured than the usual corporate approach, but also more supportive. By the third week, they were ahead of schedule on the Henderson account. Jack's military-style morning briefings had evolved into collaborative strategy sessions. His team had adopted their own version of the buddy system, always making sure someone had backup on important tasks. The breakthrough came on a Wednesday afternoon. Sarah burst into Jack's office, waving a printout. "We did it," she exclaimed. "The new routing system worked. We're 3 days ahead of projection on Henderson." Word spread quickly. Jack gathered his team to celebrate, making sure every person knew their role in the success. Emily, there for her usual after-school visit, watched as her father handed out credit to everyone but himself. "This is what excellence looks like," he told them. "Not just in the results, but in how we achieve them, together." The victory rippled through the building. Other department heads stopped by to ask about their methods. Jack's team proudly explained their system, using military terms they'd picked up from their leader: strategic objectives, tactical flexibility, unit cohesion. Up in her corner office, Victoria Steele watched the celebration through narrowed eyes. She observed as Jack's team members walked taller, spoke more confidently, worked with renewed purpose. Worst of all, she saw how others looked at him, with respect, admiration, even loyalty. "The Henderson account wasn't due for another 3 days," she said sharply to her assistant. "Mr. Reynolds' team finished early," the assistant replied carefully. "They've already started on next month's projections." Victoria turned away from the window, her perfectly manicured nails drumming on her desk. Below, she could hear the muffled sound of applause as Jack's team celebrated their success. Emily sat in her father's office later that afternoon, finishing her homework as the excitement wound down. She watched him organizing files, still wearing the same calm, steady expression he'd had all day. "Dad," she said softly, "I saw what you did today, how you led everyone. It was just like you told me about West Point, taking care of your people, showing them the way forward." Jack paused in his filing, touched by the pride in his daughter's voice. "Those lessons stay with you," he said simply. "I think Mom would be really proud," Emily added, "of how you're fighting for what's right." Jack looked at his daughter, seeing in her face the same strength and conviction that had drawn him to her mother all those years ago. Outside his office, the team was still buzzing with achievement. Their success hadn't just been about numbers and deadlines. It had been about proving that leadership built on honor and compassion could triumph in the corporate world. Jack's military values, far from being outdated, had shown everyone a better way forward. The kitchen table was covered with textbooks and notebooks, pencils scattered across its wooden surface like pickup sticks. Emily sat hunched over her math homework, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jack leaned in beside her, his finger moving across the algebra equation. "So if x equals 12, he explained patiently, "then we can substitute that value here." He tapped the paper with his pencil. Emily nodded slowly, her eyes lighting up with understanding. "Oh, now I get it. The whole equation balances out." She quickly wrote down the solution, then looked up at her father with a grin. "You know, you explained this way better than Mrs. Henderson." Jack chuckled, running a hand through his graying hair. "Well, Those engineering classes at West Point had to be good for something. "Did Mom help you study when you were at West Point?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice soft. Jack's hand stilled on the textbook. His heart squeezed at the unexpected question. "No, sweetie. I met your mom after graduation, remember? She was working at that coffee shop near the base." Emily smiled, a distant look in her eyes. "Yeah, you told me. She spilled coffee all over your uniform. And instead of being mad, I asked her out to dinner," Jack finished, warmth spreading through his chest at the memory. "She always said it was the best mistake she ever made." Emily pushed her homework aside and reached for the cookie jar, their traditional study break snack. "Tell me more about her. Sometimes I worry I'm forgetting things." Jack took a deep breath, accepting the cookie Emily offered. "She was the kindest person I've ever known. Smart, too. She could solve crossword puzzles faster than anyone." And she had this laugh. He paused, hearing it echo in his mind. It was impossible not to smile when she laughed. "Like when she tried to teach me to ride a bike," Emily said, her eyes brightening. "She kept running behind me, laughing and cheering, even though she was out of breath." "That's right," Jack smiled. "She never gave up on anything or anyone." Emily was quiet for a moment, breaking her cookie into small pieces. "Dad, I've been thinking about something." "What is it, sweetheart?" "Mom would be really proud of you right now." Emily's voice was earnest. "With everything happening at work and how you're standing up for yourself, you seem different lately. Stronger, like the dad I remember from before she got sick." Jack felt his throat tighten. He reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand. "Emily, I mean it," she continued, her eyes glistening. "For a while after she died, it was like you were just going through the motions. But now," she gestured at the homework spread between them, at the comfortable kitchen around them. "Now you're really here again, fighting for what matters. Mom always said that was one of the things she loved most about you." Jack had to swallow hard before he could speak. "Your mom was my strength for a long time. After we lost her, I wasn't sure how to find that strength again." "But you did," Emily said firmly. "You're finding it now. I see it every day." She smiled, wiping quickly at her eyes. "And I know she sees it too." Jack stood up and walked around the table, pulling Emily into a tight hug. She buried her face in his shoulder, just like she used to when she was little. For a moment, they just held each other, sharing memories and love that didn't need words. Finally, Emily pulled back, giving him a watery smile. "We should probably finish this math homework." Jack kissed the top of her head. "You work on the next problem. I'll be right back." He walked down the hallway to his bedroom, where a framed photograph sat on his dresser. Sarah Reynolds smiled back at him, her eyes bright with joy, her arms wrapped around a younger Emily at the beach. It was one of the last family vacations they'd taken before the diagnosis. Jack picked up the frame, his thumb brushing across the glass. "I miss you every day," he whispered. "But our girl is right. I'm finding my way back." He took a deep breath, looking at his wife's radiant smile. "I promise you, Sarah, I won't give up. Emily needs me to be strong, and I'm going to keep fighting. For her, for us." The sound of Emily calling from the kitchen, "Dad, I think I solved it," made him smile. He set the photograph back in its place of honor and turned toward his daughter's voice, toward the future they were building together, one small victory at a time. The morning started like any other at the logistics company. Coffee cups steamed on desks, keyboards clicked steadily, and the usual hum of office conversation filled the air. Jack Reynolds sat at his desk, reviewing shipment schedules when his phone buzzed. The message from Miguel made his heart skip a beat. "Emergency meeting, conference room, now." Walking briskly down the hallway, Jack noticed others hurrying in the same direction. Through the glass walls of the conference room, he could see Victoria Steele standing at the head of the table, her face drawn and tense. Department heads filled the chairs around her, their expressions grim. "We have a situation," Victoria announced as Jack slipped into an empty chair. "The Robertson contract is in jeopardy. Our primary shipping route through the Panama Canal is completely blocked due to mechanical failures. We have 48 hours to get $3.2 million worth of medical supplies to San Francisco, or we lose everything." The room erupted in chaos. Manager voices overlapped. "That's impossible. We can't reroute that much cargo in 2 days. The contract penalties will bankrupt us." Jack watched as panic spread across faces. He recognized the familiar spiral of fear. He'd seen it in combat zones when situations seemed hopeless. Victoria's attempts to restore order only added to the frenzy as managers argued over impossible solutions. Taking a deep breath, Jack stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound cutting through the noise. Years of military training took over as he spoke, his voice steady and commanding. "May I approach the board?" he asked, gesturing to the whiteboard behind Victoria. Victoria hesitated, then stepped aside with obvious reluctance. Jack picked up a marker and began drawing a map. "Right now, we have 3 warehouses holding Robertson's supplies," he said, marking points on his crude map. "Instead of seeing this as one massive shipment, we need to break it down into coordinated movements, just like a military operation." The room grew quiet. Jack continued, his marker squeaking as he drew lines across the board. "We can split this into 3 parallel operations." His hand moved confidently across the board. "Team Alpha takes the northern route through Seattle. Team Bravo moves through Salt Lake City. Team Charlie handles the southern approach through Los Angeles." He turned to face the room. "We need 3 coordinated convoys, moving simultaneously. I've handled similar logistics under much worse conditions in Afghanistan." The managers leaned forward, their earlier panic giving way to focused attention. Jack moved to the conference table and spread out shipping manifests. "Miguel, your team has contacts with independent trucking companies in the Northwest, correct?" Miguel nodded eagerly. "Yes, several reliable ones." "Good. You'll head Team Alpha." Jack turned to another manager. "Sarah, your department handles our California operations. You're Team Charlie." "David, you take Team Bravo through the central route." He assigned roles quickly, his military precision showing through as he delegated responsibilities. People began taking notes, their movements becoming purposeful rather than panicked. "But the cost," Victoria interjected from the corner where she'd been watching silently. "Will be less than losing the entire contract?" Jack finished firmly. "We'll need to authorize overtime and premium rates for drivers, but I've already calculated the margins. We can make this work." He pulled up spreadsheets on the projector, showing his rapid calculations. The numbers were tight but feasible. Victoria's objection died on her lips as board members nodded in agreement. "We'll need round-the-clock coordination," Jack continued. "I'll set up a command center here in the conference room. Each team leader will report in every 2 hours. We'll track every truck, every mile, every minute." Energy began to fill the room. Not the frantic energy of panic, but the focused determination of purpose. Jack moved between groups, answering questions, adjusting plans, offering solutions to potential problems before they could arise. "What about driver fatigue regulations?" someone asked. "Already factored in," Jack replied. "We'll have relay teams at these points." He marked several cities on the map. Fresh drivers take over while maintaining continuous movement. More questions came, and Jack handled each one with calm efficiency. His military background wasn't just showing, it was proving invaluable. The same skills that had helped him coordinate troop movements across hostile terrain were now being applied to save their biggest contract. Workers began filtering into the conference room, drawn by the activity. Instead of sending them away, Jack incorporated them into the plan. "We need people monitoring weather patterns, tracking road conditions, coordinating with truck stops for priority refueling." Everyone has a role. The employees straightened their backs, infected by Jack's quiet confidence. Even those not directly involved in shipping wanted to help. Someone set up a coffee station in the corner. Another person organized a schedule for food deliveries. The conference room transformed into a legitimate command center. "First convoy moves out in 30 minutes, Jack announced, checking his watch. "Team leaders, get your people in position. Communication channels need to be open and tested in 15. Let's move." The room burst into coordinated activity. People rushed to their assigned tasks with purpose, not panic. Jack stood at the center of it all, calm and focused, exactly as he'd been trained to be in times of crisis. Victoria watched from the doorway as her employees rallied around Jack's leadership. She saw the respect in their eyes, the confidence in their movements, the trust in their quick responses to his directions. This was more than just crisis management. This was natural leadership in action. "Sir," a young employee approached Jack hesitantly. "I know I'm just from accounting, but I used to dispatch for a trucking company. Could I help coordinate the drivers?" "Perfect." Jack nodded, immediately integrating her into the team. "Set up at that station. Miguel will get you the contact lists. More volunteers stepped forward, each finding their place in the operation. The chaos of an hour ago had transformed into a smooth-running machine, all following Jack's clear vision and calm direction. As the first trucks began rolling out, right on schedule, Jack stood before the map, tracking their movements. The room hummed with purposeful energy. Phones rang with updates, and computers displayed real-time tracking data. His military training hadn't just prepared him for this moment, it had prepared everyone else to follow him through it. The employees moved with newfound confidence, pride evident in their efficient actions. They weren't just saving a contract anymore. They were proving what they could accomplish under true leadership. Jack's quiet strength had become their strength, his clarity of purpose, their guide through the crisis. Jack Reynolds stood in the conference room at 3 a.m., surrounded by empty coffee cups and tired faces lit by computer screens. The whiteboard behind him was covered with flowcharts and contingency plans, his neat military handwriting filling every available space. "All right, team," Jack said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Let's review one more time. Miguel, how's the backup supplier looking?" Miguel rubbed his eyes but managed to smile. "They're on standby, Jack. I got them to match our regular rates, just like you suggested. They can start shipping within 2 hours of our go-ahead." Jack nodded, turning to another colleague. "Sarah, what about the logistics rerouting?" "All trucks are positioned exactly where you mapped out," Sarah replied, stifling a yawn. "Your military convoy experience really paid off here. We've got alternative routes planned for every possible bottleneck." The room buzzed with quiet determination. Jack had been amazed at how many employees had volunteered to stay through the night when he'd explained his plan. Now, looking at their tired but committed faces, he felt a surge of pride. "Listen up, everyone," Jack said, standing straighter. "In the Army, we had a saying, we're only as strong as our weakest link. But looking around this room, I don't see any weak links. I see a team of people who refuse to give up." The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the windows when the first reports started coming in. The backup suppliers' trucks were rolling out right on schedule. The rerouted shipments were hitting their marks. One by one, the pieces of Jack's carefully crafted plan fell into place. By 9 a.m., the office was filling with regular staff who found their night shift colleagues still working, tired but triumphant. The news spread quickly. The crisis was being contained. The contract would be saved. At 10 a.m., the board members began arriving for their emergency meeting. They found instead a smoothly running operation, with Jack at the center of it all, calmly directing traffic like a seasoned conductor. "Mr. Reynolds," one of the board members called out. "I understand you've been here all night?" Jack turned, fighting back fatigue. "Yes, sir. The team has been incredible. Everyone pulled together." Colonel Sarah Daniels, the board member who had defended him earlier, walked the floor, examining the operation with an expert eye. "Military precision," she remarked with approval. "This is exactly why West Point graduates are valued leaders." Victoria Steele stood in her office doorway, watching the scene unfold. Her face was unreadable, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her coffee cup. Just then, the elevator doors opened, and Emily stepped out. She had texted her father earlier, worried when he hadn't come home, and he'd told her to come to the office after school. She stopped short, taking in the scene. The exhausted but proud employees, the impressed board members, and her father standing tall in the middle of it all. "Dad?" she called out. Jack turned, his tired face lighting up at the sight of his daughter. "Hey, sweetheart." Emily walked closer, her eyes wide as she observed the controlled chaos around her. "Did you really stay up all night fixing this?" Before Jack could answer, Miguel jumped in. "Your dad was amazing, Emily. He kept us all going, knew exactly what to do. He's a real hero." Other employees chimed in, sharing stories of the night's events. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she listened to the praise being heaped on her father. "The final numbers are in," Sarah from accounting suddenly called out, running across the floor with a printout. "We didn't just save the contract. We improved on the original delivery timeline." A cheer went up from the assembled employees. People who had worked through the night hugged those just arriving for their regular shifts. Board members nodded approvingly, comparing notes and looking impressed. Colonel Daniels stepped forward, raising her voice to be heard above the celebration. "Mr. Reynolds, I think I speak for the entire board when I say this is exactly the kind of leadership we need more of in this company." The cheering grew louder. Jack felt hands patting his back, heard congratulations from all sides, but his eyes were on Emily, who was beaming at him through her tears. She ran forward and threw her arms around him. "Dad, I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Jack hugged her back, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time since losing his wife, he felt truly strong again. Not just for himself, but for his daughter, for his team, for everyone who had believed in him. The board members were gathering in a corner, talking animatedly. Colonel Daniels was gesturing emphatically, pointing occasionally in Jack's direction. Victoria had disappeared back into her office, the door closing firmly behind her. But Jack barely noticed any of it. He was surrounded by his team, people who had stuck with him through the night, who had trusted his leadership when it mattered most. They were tired but happy, sharing stories of their overnight adventure, already turning their crisis into the stuff of office legend. Emily stayed by his side, watching it all with shining eyes. "Mom would be so proud," she said softly. Jack squeezed her shoulder, too moved to speak. Around them, the celebration continued. Phones rang with congratulations from clients and partners. Someone ordered breakfast for the entire office. The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the scene of triumph. For this one shining moment, Jack Reynolds wasn't the passed-over veteran or the struggling single dad. He was simply a leader who had risen to the challenge, a man who had proven his worth not through words, but through actions. And as he stood there, with his daughter beside him and his team around him, he knew that this was what real victory felt like. The morning sun cast long shadows through the office windows as Jack strode confidently down the hallway. The past few days had been a whirlwind of congratulations and handshakes after his team's success with the supply chain crisis. His phone buzzed, a message from HR requesting his immediate presence. He straightened his tie, assuming it was about his long-overdue promotion. The HR director, Marion Peters, sat behind her desk with an unusually grave expression. Next to her was Thomas Chen from legal, his face equally somber. Jack's smile faded as he noticed the thick manila folders centered on Marion's desk. "Please sit down, Mr. Reynolds," Marion said, her voice carefully neutral. Jack lowered himself into the chair, his military posture automatically kicking in. "Is everything all right?" Marion cleared her throat. "We've received some concerning documentation regarding your military service." She slid the folder toward him. "These reports suggest serious misconduct during your time in the Army." Jack's blood ran cold. He opened the folder with steady hands that betrayed none of the turmoil churning inside him. Page after page of official-looking documents detailed fabricated incidents, negligence during combat operations, misappropriation of resources, endangering fellow soldiers. His vision blurred as he processed the magnitude of the lies. "This is completely false," he said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Every single word." Thomas Chen leaned forward. "We understand this is difficult, but these reports appear to come directly from Army records. They're signed by your former commanding officers." "Those signatures are forged," Jack insisted, recognizing names of officers he'd served under. "I can prove it. I have copies of my actual service records at home." "We're initiating a formal investigation," Marion explained. "In the meantime, you'll be placed on administrative leave." Through the glass walls of the HR office, Jack could see Victoria Steele watching from the hallway, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The pieces clicked into place, her threatened authority, her desperation to maintain control, her warning that she'd bury him. Walking back to his desk felt like the longest journey of his life. Whispers followed him as news spread through the office. Colleagues who'd cheered him days ago now averted their eyes. Miguel tried to approach, but Jack shook his head slightly. He couldn't handle sympathy right now. He gathered his personal items with mechanical precision, muscle memory from countless military pack-ups taking over. His West Point diploma came off the wall last, the gold embossing now seeming to mock him. Everything he'd built his life on, honor, integrity, service, was being twisted into something ugly. The drive home was a blur. Jack's phone kept buzzing with messages from concerned coworkers, but he couldn't bring himself to read them. He pulled into the driveway of their modest house, sitting in the car for long minutes as he tried to gather strength for what he'd have to tell Emily. But Emily wasn't home yet. Jack paced the living room, rehearsing explanations that all sounded hollow. "How do you tell your teenage daughter that someone has tried to destroy everything you've taught her to believe in?" His phone rang. Emily's school. His daughter's voice came through shaking with tears. Dad, can you come get me? Please? Jack found Emily waiting outside the school office, her shoulders hunched, clutching her backpack like a shield. As they walked to the car, he heard snippets of conversation from passing students. That's her, Reynolds' kid. Heard he got kicked out. Total fraud. Emily slid into the passenger seat and burst into tears. They're saying horrible things about you, Dad! Megan showed everyone these posts online about your Army record being fake and that you lied about everything. Jack's heart shattered. He'd faced combat, lost his wife, raised a daughter alone, but nothing had prepared him for seeing his child suffer because of lies told about him. I told them it wasn't true, Emily continued between sobs. I told them about your medals, about how proud Mom was of you. But they just laughed and said I was lying too. Jack pulled her into a tight hug across the center console, feeling her tears soak into his shirt. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry you have to go through this. The drive home was silent except for Emily's occasional sniffles. As soon as they arrived, she ran to her room and closed the door. Jack stood in the hallway, listening to her muffled crying, feeling more helpless than he had since her mother's death. The house grew dark as evening fell, but Jack didn't bother turning on any lights. He sat alone in the living room, surrounded by family photos and military memorabilia that now felt like artifacts from another life. His phone continued buzzing occasionally, probably more messages from concerned friends or maybe reporters trying to get a statement. The weight of shame pressed down on him like a physical force. Everything he'd worked for, every value he'd tried to instill in Emily, every sacrifice he'd made, all of it was being twisted and destroyed by Victoria's lies. The sound of his daughter's continued crying drifted down the hallway, each sob another crack in his already broken heart. In the darkness, Jack stared at the wall where his West Point diploma now leaned, still wrapped in bubble wrap from his office. The glass seemed to reflect back all his doubts and fears. For the first time since leaving the Army, he felt truly defeated. The community center basement wasn't much to look at. Folding chairs formed a circle under harsh fluorescent lights, and the coffee in the corner had gone cold hours ago. But for Jack Reynolds, this Thursday night Veterans Support Group had become his lifeline over the past 3 years. Tonight, his hands trembled as he gripped his paper cup. The familiar faces around him, men and women who had served across different branches and eras, waited patiently. They could see the weight pressing down on his shoulders. I thought I was doing everything right, Jack finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Serving with honor, raising my daughter, working hard. But now... He paused, swallowing hard. Now they're saying I did things in the Army, things that never happened, and people are starting to believe it. Marcus, a retired Marine with silver hair, leaned forward in his chair. Tell us what you're really afraid of, Jack. The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Jack stared at the linoleum floor, gathering his thoughts. I'm afraid Emily will have to live with this shame. That everything I've built, her trust in me, my reputation, the life we've made since Sarah died, it's all going to fall apart because of these lies. Look at me, son, came a gravelly voice from across the circle. It belonged to Frank, their oldest member, a Vietnam veteran who rarely spoke. You think your honor is something someone else can take away? Jack met the older man's steady gaze. They're making it look real, Frank. Official reports, witnesses. Paperwork doesn't make truth, Frank replied firmly. Truth is what you lived. Truth is what you know in your heart. And everyone in this room knows what kind of soldier you were, what kind of man you are. Lisa, an Army nurse who had served in Afghanistan, nodded. You know who you are, Jack. We know who you are. Your daughter knows who you are. That's what matters. But how do I fight this? Jack's voice cracked. How do I protect Emily from it? The same way you protected your unit, Marcus said. By standing your ground. By remembering what they taught us at West Point. Duty, honor, country. Those aren't just words on a wall, brother. They're who you are. Around the circle, heads nodded in agreement. Jack felt something stir in his chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps it's beginning. Your honor is stronger than her lies, Frank stated, each word carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Always has been. Always will be. That's why she's trying so hard to destroy it. Because she knows she can't match it. A younger veteran named Tommy spoke up. Remember when I was struggling last year? You told me something I'll never forget. You said, the truth doesn't need defending, it just needs witnesses. Well, you've got a whole room of witnesses right here. The words hung in the air as other veterans began sharing their own stories of facing false accusations, of fighting through doubt, of rediscovering their strength through faith and fellowship. Jack listened, drawing strength from their experiences. These weren't just fellow veterans, they were family. They understood what it meant to stand alone against seemingly impossible odds. They knew the cost of honor and its worth. As the meeting drew to a close, the group formed a tight circle around Jack. One by one, they clasped his shoulder, shook his hand, offered words of encouragement. Their touch carried more than sympathy. It carried solidarity. Same time next week, Marcus reminded him. But you call any of us, day or night, if you need to talk. We've got your six. The drive home was quiet, but Jack's mind was full. The veteran's words echoed in his thoughts, mixing with memories of his own service, of the principles that had guided him through combat and loss. When he arrived home, the house was dark, except for a small lamp in the living room. Emily had left a note saying she was already in bed. Jack climbed the stairs slowly, his body heavy with exhaustion but his spirit somehow lighter than it had been in days. In his bedroom, Jack did something he hadn't done since Sarah died. He pulled out his old dress uniform from the back of the closet. The brass was tarnished, but the metal still caught what little light there was. Each one represented not just an achievement, but a test of character passed. Kneeling beside his bed, Jack closed his eyes. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't know if I have the strength for this fight, but I know you do. Help me be the father Emily needs. Help me stand firm in the truth." He heard a soft creak behind him and opened his eyes. Emily stood in the doorway in her pajamas, her face soft with concern. Without a word, she crossed the room and knelt beside him. Her small hand found his larger one and squeezed tight. Father and daughter stayed there in the darkness, their joined hands a bridge between fear and faith, between doubt and determination. In that moment, Jack felt something he thought he had lost, not just hope, but certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together, anchored by truth that no lie could shake. The doorbell rang on Saturday morning, startling Jack from his morning coffee. Emily was still asleep upstairs, and the house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the dishwasher. He wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at 7 in the morning. When he opened the door, his mouth fell open. There stood General Richard Hayes, as commanding as ever in his civilian clothes. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and his posture remained as straight as a flagpole. Even in khakis and a polo shirt, he carried the unmistakable air of authority that had earned him respect from thousands of soldiers. "Sir!" Jack's military training kicked in automatically. His spine straightened, and his hand twitched as if to salute. The general's weathered face broke into a warm smile. "At ease, son. And it's just Richard now. I've been retired for 3 years. What brings you here, Richard?" Jack stumbled over his words, still processing the surprise visit. "Got a call from Sarah Daniels." The general's expression hardened. "She told me what's happening at your company. Mind if I come in?" Jack stepped aside, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Of course. Coffee? Black, if you have it." General Hayes settled into a chair at the kitchen table, his eyes taking in the modest but tidy home. Photos of Emily and Jack's late wife lined the walls, along with Jack's framed West Point diploma. Jack poured a fresh cup and set it before his former commander. His hands trembled slightly. He hadn't seen the general since his wife's funeral 4 years ago. "Now then," Hayes said, wrapping his thick fingers around the mug. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, Jack laid out the whole story. The blocked promotion, Victoria's prejudice against his military background, the crisis he'd handled, and finally the false accusations that threatened to destroy everything he'd built. The general listened intently, his jaw tightening with each new detail. When Jack finished, Hayes set down his empty cup with deliberate care. "And these accusations," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They're about your service record?" Jack nodded, slumping in his chair. "She's claiming I covered up serious misconduct during my final deployment, that I endangered my men for personal glory." "The hell you did!" Hayes's fist came down on the table hard enough to make the cups rattle. "I commanded that operation myself. You saved 12 lives that day." Footsteps creaked on the stairs, and Emily appeared in the doorway, looking sleepy and confused. "Dad, is everything okay?" Jack softened his voice.
"Everything's fine, sweetie. This is General Hayes. He was my commanding officer in the Army."
Emily's eyes widened with recognition. "The one from the story about the rescue mission?" "The very same," Hayes said, his stern expression melting into a grandfatherly smile. "Your dad was one of the finest officers I ever commanded." Emily beamed, then headed to the kitchen to pour herself some orange juice. Jack watched her with a sad smile, remembering how proud she'd been when he first told her about his military service. The general lowered his voice. "Jack, do you still have copies of your service records?" "In my home office. But Victoria's evidence is pretty convincing. She's had months to fabricate it." Hayes stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Get them, now." Jack hurried to his office and returned with a thick manila envelope. The general spread the documents across the table, examining each page with practiced eyes. "This is everything?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Every commendation, every evaluation, every mission report." Hayes gathered the papers carefully, squaring the edges with military precision. "Good. Because I'm about to remind your CEO what real leadership looks like." "Sir, you don't have to." "The hell I don't." Hayes's voice boomed, then softened as he glanced at Emily. "Sorry, young lady, but your father's honor is worth fighting for." Emily grinned. "Go get him, General." Hayes stood, tucking the envelope under his arm. "I've got the original mission reports in my personal files at home, and about 30 witnesses I can call. By Monday morning, your CEO won't know what hit her." Jack walked him to the door, feeling simultaneously grateful and anxious. "I don't know how to thank you." "You can thank me by keeping your head high," Hayes said firmly. "Remember what we taught you at West Point. Honor doesn't hide. The truth always surfaces." As the general strode to his car with the determined gait of a man on a mission, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. It wasn't just the documents in Hayes's possession or his reputation that gave Jack comfort. It was the reminder that he wasn't alone, that his military family still had his back after all these years. Emily appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "Dad, is General Hayes going to help fix things?" Jack squeezed her hand, watching Hayes's car disappear around the corner.
"I think he is, sweetheart. I really think he island."
For the first time since Victoria had launched her attack, Jack felt the heavy weight of despair lifting from his shoulders. The flicker of hope in his chest grew stronger as he thought about Hayes's words. Honor doesn't hide. The truth always surfaces. The mahogany-lined boardroom hummed with tension as Victoria Steele stood at the head of the long table, her designer suit as crisp as her demeanor. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs while she tapped a thick folder with her manicured fingernail. "As I was saying," Victoria's voice cut through the air like ice, "these documents prove beyond doubt that Mr. Reynolds is not the paragon of virtue he pretends to be." She pulled out several papers, spreading them across the polished surface. His military record shows serious infractions, incidents he conveniently never mentioned. Jack sat quietly at the far end of the table, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The familiar weight of his West Point ring pressed against his finger, a reminder of everything he'd worked for. His heart pounded, but years of military training kept his face composed. Colonel Sarah Daniels, the veteran board member, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. "These accusations are extremely serious, Miss Steele. I assume you've thoroughly verified these sources?" Victoria's red lips curved into a slight smile. "Of course. Everything is properly documented." She began passing copies around the table. "As you can see, there were multiple incidents of insubordination, questionable judgment in the field, and the heavy boardroom doors burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. General Richard Hayes stood in the doorway, his military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. His steel-gray hair and weathered face spoke of decades of command, and his eyes blazed with controlled fury. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone used to commanding troops. "But I believe you're discussing one of my former officers." Victoria's perfectly composed expression flickered. "I'm sorry, but this is a private board meeting. Security will—" "I'm General Richard Hayes, United States Army, retired." He strode into the room, his presence filling the space. "And I commanded Captain Jack Reynolds for 3 years." He carried a worn leather briefcase. which he set firmly on the table. Jack stood at attention automatically, ingrained respect showing in every line of his body. "General, sir." The general nodded to Jack before turning his attention back to Victoria. "I understand you've been making some interesting claims about the captain's service record." Victoria straightened her spine, trying to maintain control. "With all due respect, General, this is a corporate matter built on lies." General Hayes cut in, his voice sharp but measured. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of official documents, their Army seals clearly visible. "I have here Captain Reynolds' complete, unredacted service record. Every mission, every commendation, every evaluation." He began laying them out methodically, creating a timeline of Jack's service. Distinguished graduate of West Point, Bronze Star recipient, 2 Purple Hearts, exceptional officer evaluations across the board. Each document landed with the weight of truth. The board members leaned forward, examining the papers with growing interest. Colonel Daniels picked up one document, her eyes widening as she read. "This mission in Kandahar," she said, looking at Jack with new respect. "You led a rescue operation under heavy fire?" Before Jack could answer, General Hayes spoke. "Saved 16 civilians and 4 wounded soldiers. Refused to leave anyone behind, even when ordered to withdraw. That's the kind of man you have working for you." Victoria's face had grown increasingly pale. She shuffled through her own papers, hands slightly trembling. "But these reports are fabricated," General Hayes stated flatly. He pulled out one final document. "This is an official verification from Army Records Command, dated yesterday. Every single one of your accusations is false." He turned to the board members. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to create very convincing forgeries. The question is, why?" Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Board members passed the real documents back and forth, comparing them to Victoria's versions. The differences became glaringly obvious under scrutiny. Victoria remained standing, but her authority seemed to shrink with each passing second. Her perfectly maintained facade cracked as the board members turned to stare at her with growing suspicion and shock. There must be some mistake," she stammered, her voice losing its usual sharp edge. "The only mistake," General Hayes said firmly, "was attempting to destroy the reputation of one of the finest officers I've ever commanded." He turned to address the board directly. "I've known Jack Reynolds since he was a young lieutenant. I've seen him lead under fire, make impossible decisions, and never once compromise his integrity. If you have any questions about his character or leadership abilities, I'll be happy to address them right now." The board chairman, an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses, picked up one of the general's documents. "I don't think that will be necessary, General Hayes. These records speak for themselves." He turned a cold gaze toward Victoria. "What does require immediate discussion is the origin of these false accusations." Victoria's carefully constructed world of lies began to crumble visibly around her. The stack of forged documents sat before her, like a monument to her deceit, while the general's true records formed an insurmountable wall of evidence against her machinations. Colonel Daniels stood up, her military bearing matching the general's. "I move that we immediately suspend Miss Steele, pending a full investigation into this matter." Her voice carried the weight of authority and barely contained anger. "I second the motion," another board member quickly added. The chairman nodded gravely. "All in favor?" Hands rose around the table in unanimous agreement. Victoria stood frozen, her career dissolving before her eyes as her elaborate deception unraveled completely. Jack remained silent throughout, watching with a mixture of relief and sadness as justice unfolded. The weight of weeks of false accusations lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the vindication he'd prayed for but never expected to arrive so dramatically. The general placed a supportive hand on Jack's shoulder, the gesture speaking volumes about their shared history and mutual respect. The boardroom had fallen into stunned silence, the only sound the rustling of papers as the evidence of both truth and deception lay side by side on the polished mahogany table. The atmosphere in the office crackled with electricity. Small groups of employees gathered in corners, their whispers growing steadily into a collective roar of outrage. The proof of Jack's innocence had spread through the building like wildfire, and with it came a surge of anger that could no longer be contained. Sarah from accounting stood up first, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "We demand Victoria's resignation." The call echoed through the halls, picked up by others, until it became a chorus of unified voices. Miguel led a group of workers toward the boardroom, their faces set with determination. "We won't work under someone who fabricates lies about good people," he declared. His normally cheerful expression hardened with resolve. Inside the boardroom, the board members exchanged meaningful glances. Colonel Sarah Daniels cleared her throat, her military bearing evident as she addressed her fellow board members. "We cannot maintain the integrity of this company with leadership that resorts to fraudulent accusations." The board chairman, Mr. Peterson, nodded gravely. His weathered face showed the weight of the decision before them. "Miss Steele, would you step outside while we discuss this matter?" Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she left the room. In the hallway, she faced rows of employees who had once cowered before her. Now they stood tall, their eyes full of judgment and disappointment. The walls she'd built around herself began to crack. Hours crawled by as Victoria sat alone in her office, the sounds of protest still audible through her closed door. When Mr. Peterson finally entered, his expression told her everything she needed to know. "The board has reached a decision," he said quietly. "We believe it would be best for everyone if you step down, Victoria. We'll offer you a graceful exit. But your position here is untenable." Victoria's carefully constructed world crumbled around her. Her throat felt tight as she nodded, unable to speak. The chairman left her alone with her thoughts, with the weight of her actions pressing down on her shoulders. As darkness fell and the office emptied, Victoria remained at her desk, staring at nothing. A soft knock at her door made her look up. Jack Reynolds stood in the doorway, his face showing not triumph, but compassion. "I thought we should talk," he said simply. Victoria's carefully maintained facade finally shattered. Tears spilled down her cheeks, smearing her perfect makeup. "I tried so hard to be strong," she whispered, her voice breaking, "to never show weakness, to never let anyone see what was underneath." Jack sat down across from her, saying nothing, just listening. "When you came along," Victoria continued, wiping uselessly at her tears, "with your quiet strength and your genuine leadership, everyone could see it, the real thing, and it made everything I'd built look as hollow as it really was." She stood up, walking to the window where city lights twinkled in the darkness. "I've spent my whole career climbing higher, stepping on whoever I had to, telling myself it was just business. But you," she turned to face him, her mascara streaked across her cheeks, "you showed them what real leadership looks like. Honor, integrity, everything I gave up chasing success." "It's never too late to change," Jack said softly. Victoria shook her head, a bitter smile crossing her face. "Maybe not, but it's too late for me here." She walked to her desk and pulled out a crisp envelope. "My resignation," already signed. She placed it carefully on the polished surface. "You'll do better than I ever could, Jack. They deserve someone like you." Jack stood, understanding this was both an ending and perhaps a beginning for Victoria. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he offered quietly. "Maybe somewhere else," Victoria replied, gathering her personal items with trembling hands. "Somewhere I can try to be more like." She paused, struggling with the words. "More like the person I see when I look at you." She walked to the door, then turned one last time. "I'm sorry, Jack. For everything." Her voice caught on the words. "Thank you for showing me what I'd lost along the way." With that, Victoria Steele walked out of her office for the last time, leaving behind the power she'd fought so hard to gain and the integrity she'd sacrificed to get it. Her heels clicked down the empty hallway, echoing through the silence, carrying with them the sound of defeat, revelation, and perhaps, somewhere in the distance, redemption. Jack watched her go, feeling not victory, but a deep sadness for the price ambition had extracted from a woman who'd forgotten that true leadership comes not from power, but from character. Chapter 17. The Triumphant Rise. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the company's executive conference room, casting long golden rays across the polished oak table. Jack Reynolds adjusted his tie, the same one Emily had given him for Father's Day last year, and took a deep breath. Around him, board members settled into their leather chairs, their expressions warmer than he'd ever seen them. Colonel Sarah Daniels, who had first defended him in that fateful meeting months ago, sat directly across from him, a knowing smile on her face. The other board members exchanged quiet glances, and Jack could feel the shift in the room's energy, so different from the tension that had filled these walls during Victoria's reign. "Mr. Reynolds," began Thomas Wheeler, the board chairman, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "The events of the past few months have shown us something remarkable about leadership. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal true character." Jack's mind flashed back to those difficult days, the supply chain crisis, the false accusations, the dark moments when he'd questioned everything. But he also remembered the unwavering support of his team, Emily's steadfast faith in him, and the veterans who'd reminded him to stand tall. "The board has conducted an extensive review," Wheeler continued, shuffling some papers before him. "Your military service record, your performance here, and most importantly, your handling of recent challenges have demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership this company needs." Colonel Daniels leaned forward. "Jack, we're not just looking for someone who can manage numbers and contracts. We need someone who can inspire people. Someone who understands that integrity isn't just a word on a mission statement." Jack's throat tightened with emotion. He thought of Emily, how proud she'd be, how proud her mother would be. "Therefore," Wheeler said, standing now, "it is my pleasure, on behalf of the Board of Directors, to officially offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer of Reynolds Logistics Corporation." The room burst into applause. Jack stood, overwhelmed by the moment, and shook Wheeler's extended hand. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored by your trust." "The honor is ours," Colonel Daniels said, joining them. "Now, about your acceptance speech at the ceremony next week." The days flew by in a blur of preparations. Emily helped him practice his speech every evening, offering suggestions and gentle critiques. "Dad, you should definitely mention the veteran program idea," she'd say, curled up on their living room couch. "And don't forget about helping other single parents. That's important too." Finally, the day of the ceremony arrived. The company's main auditorium was packed with employees, board members, and special guests. Jack stood backstage, adjusting his suit jacket one last time. "Dad?" Emily appeared beside him, looking beautiful in her new blue dress. "You look perfect. Stop fidgeting." He smiled down at her, reminded so much of her mother in that moment. "Thanks, sweetie. Nervous, I guess." "Don't be," she said, straightening his tie. "Just be you. That's what got you here." The chairman's voice boomed through the speakers, introducing Jack. Emily gave him a quick hug and hurried to her front row seat. Jack stepped onto the stage, blinking against the bright lights. The applause was thunderous. He saw familiar faces everywhere. Miguel beaming from the third row, his veteran support group members scattered throughout the crowd, Colonel Daniels nodding encouragingly from her seat with the board. Jack raised his hand, and the room gradually fell silent. He looked down at his prepared speech, then set it aside. Instead, he found Emily's eyes in the crowd and began to speak from his heart. "When I graduated from West Point, I learned that leadership isn't about power or position. It's about service, about putting others before yourself." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. "In the military, we lived by a code of honor. Some might call it old-fashioned, but I've never seen anything more modern or more relevant than simple integrity." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. "As your CEO, I promise to lead with the same values I learned as a soldier and the same compassion I've tried to show as a father. This company will be known not just for its success, but for its heart." He outlined his plans: a new veteran hiring initiative, mentoring programs for single parents, leadership training based on values and character. With each point, the enthusiasm in the room grew. "Finally," Jack said, his voice softening, "I want to make one more promise. To everyone in this room, and especially to my daughter Emily, I will never forget that true leadership means serving others. It means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And it means remembering that every person in this company is part of our extended family." Emily wiped tears from her eyes as the audience rose in a standing ovation. Jack placed his hand on the Bible that Wheeler held out, took his oath of office, and signed the official documents. As the chairman presented him with the company seal, Jack caught Emily's radiant smile in the front row. She mouthed the words he knew were in both their hearts. Mom would be so proud. The applause continued as Jack shook hands with the board members. He could feel it in the room. Not just celebration, but hope. Hope for a new kind of leadership. Hope for a company that would stand for something more than just profits. The evening light painted warm shadows across the Reynolds' modest dining room as Jack and Emily sat down to a celebratory dinner. The table was set simply, their everyday plates, glasses of sparkling cider, and Emily's attempt at making her father's favorite lasagna. The familiar scent of garlic bread filled their home, making it feel even cozier than usual. "I still can't believe it, Dad," Emily said, her eyes sparkling as she served the slightly misshapen lasagna. "CEO! Remember when you used to tell me stories about being a new lieutenant fresh out of West Point?" Jack chuckled, watching his daughter's careful movements with the serving spatula. "That feels like a lifetime ago, though I have to say, your lasagna looks much better than the mess hall food we had back then." "Well, I followed Mom's recipe," Emily grinned, though her voice softened at the mention of her mother. "I found it in that old notebook, the one with all the food stains on the cover." Jack's eyes crinkled with fondness. "She never could keep a recipe book clean. Remember that Christmas when she tried to make gingerbread cookies? And the whole kitchen ended up covered in flour." Emily laughed, the sound bright and clear. "She said it looked like a winter wonderland. Your mother always knew how to find the bright side of things." Jack took a bite of the lasagna and smiled warmly. "This is delicious, sweetheart. You've got her touch." Emily beamed with pride. "I had to make something special. It's not every day your dad becomes CEO." She took a sip of her cider and added, "Though I think the whole veteran hiring program you're starting is even cooler than the title." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Those men and women deserve a chance, just like Colonel Daniels gave me one when she spoke up in that board meeting." "That was like something out of a movie," Emily said, gesturing with her fork. "And then when General Martinez showed up with all your records," Victoria's face turned so white. "Hey now," Jack gently admonished, though he couldn't hide his smile. "Remember what we said about forgiveness?" Emily rolled her eyes good-naturedly. I know. But Dad, she tried to ruin everything. And in the end, she only made us stronger," Jack reminded her. "Sometimes our biggest challenges become our greatest blessings." They ate in comfortable silence for a moment, the clink of forks against plates mixing with the soft music playing from the kitchen radio, the same old station her mother used to love. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Emily asked suddenly, setting down her fork. "What's that?" "That you never gave up. Even when things got really bad. When people were saying awful things, you stayed true to yourself." She fiddled with her napkin. "I was so scared when I heard those kids at school talking. But then I remembered what Mom always said about standing tall." Jack reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Your mother was the strongest person I knew. She taught us both about dignity and grace." "And faith," Emily added softly. "Remember how she always said God doesn't give us more than we can handle?" "She was right about that too." Jack's voice was thick with emotion. "Just like she was right about you being our greatest blessing." Emily stood up and walked around the table, wrapping her arms around her father's shoulders. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she said, "Mom would be proud of you." Jack turned in his chair and hugged her tightly, tears of gratitude welling in his eyes. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their home and the memory of his beloved wife, he felt the pure blessing of renewal, of faith rewarded, of hope restored. Everything they had been through, the struggles, the pain, the victories, had led them here, to this simple moment of father and daughter, bound by love and strengthened by adversity. As they held each other, the last rays of sunset painted the room in soft golden light, as if heaven itself was smiling down on their little celebration. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility and rich with promise, built on the foundation of honor, integrity, and unwavering faith that had carried them through their darkest hours. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Reynolds, I hand-picked the next story that you will enjoy. Please, don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.